So we have been working on our Postgres database for an ample period of time. Let's look into the process of authentication and authorization because it's an important aspect when dealing with the full stack. Now, authentication generally means like you're validating a user. That user is a part of your website. They have credentials for it. And talking about the authentication, it's like what kind of role they have. So if the user is just a normal user or whether they could be the admin. So they could have certain types of privileges. They could make changes on those requests. So it depends what kind of authorization do they have. Like take for example, if you have your university website, as a student, you can't make much more changes onto it. But if you're talking about the faculty member, they could upload different sort of data onto that website. So they are authorized to do that. They have to do the authentication, so do we. But the other aspect is like they are authorized, they are given the permissions, like they have the specific privileges to make changes onto that. So let's learn how to do this. I have built the authentication on the persistence layer. So let's look into that. Firstly, we have the as usual our model files like app.cs, which we have the properties, and then a constructor. Same goes with the robot command controller. Here, robot command.cs, again the properties, and a constructor to create the objects for those properties. Moving on to something next is like the user model. Now, when we are talking about the authentication, it's usually the user who needs to be authenticated. So a user model class with the properties like ID, email, first name, last name, password hash. Now I will be talking about the password hash after a while. Then the description and role are like they could be null. So and the created date and modified date. And the constructor seems to be default constructor over here. Now, when we are talking about the user model, we need to have something called login. So we have a user model, we have all the sorts of information about the user, but in order to do the login, we just need an email and a password. So another class, and we have assigned the properties called email password. After that, let's look on to the controller of each map controller. Now, don't get confused in the authorized part. We will cover that up in a bit. Just look, it still remains the same. Just forget about this part. Like it tells you like who has the access of that particular part. So if you're admin only or if you're user only, you can just see those get maps. You can see the maps. But if you wanted to post something onto the website or currently we are just working on the backend, that needs to be done by the admin only. So we are going to specify what kind of roles a particular person has when we are authenticating it. And actually, we are posting it, and then we have to authenticate it to get the information out of the Postgres database using the Postman. Then moving on to the robot command controller, again, I have suggested the authorized policy over here, but we will be talking about that because we have to make that over in the basic handler. So there you go. Then we have the map.data access. It's similar as it should be. No changes were made in here. And same goes with the robot command data access. The only thing that changed is like the user data access because we have created that in this particular project only. So you establish the connection. Okay, just a second. You establish a connection. Again, it's follows the same structure as the other two map data access. So you establish the SQL connection, select the pathway, like here for the get request, read those value. This read function is for the iteration part of it, so it reads all the properties inside the user, and then Moving on to the adding the user. Again, we have used the parameterized part for it because we don't want the SQL injection. And same goes for the if you wanted to get user by the emails. All these things were necessary for the task. And here we have the execute non-query, which means like whenever it's returning value, it should be, if no changes were made in here, it should return value 0 if the changes were made. So a particular row was affected during that. So it will return 1. And in case of when we are talking about get, just a second, execute reader, here it actually returns us everything, whatever that's onto the Postgres database on that particular table. And we have delete user, similar with the update user, we have the query over here using the parameterized to actually give the value over here, pass the values there, and now the main aspect of this code is basic authentication. Now, these are the library used for this. So Microsoft.asp.authentication. Now we need this for actually using the classes which are already made. So we are actually using the authentication and handler class, and in which we have particularly passing this data type authentication scheme option. Now, in order to use this option, we need this particular library, Microsoft extension dot options, then the identity. I'll be talking what identity is, and then the encoding like of the web. So it encodes the URL that we write and claims. I'll be getting to that, and then we have text. So given the namespace, I've been using the same namespace for all those different files. So robot controller API dot persistence. Now created a class called basic authentication and handle. So in this we, in order to do the authentication through the Postman, we would be using basic auth authentication, the complete full form. You can use JWT bearer, which stands for JSON Web Token. There are ample number of other algorithms that you can use. So it's inheriting from the authentication handler and passing the data type over here. Then creating a constructor. The constructor has options, which is derived from I options monitor. Then iLogger, which so options has all the configuration related to that. The logger has all the data, and the encoder is for the URL, and system clock is for the timing part of it, and the base. Now the base is actually whatever we have inherited from the authentication handler. We would be using option logger in order and clock. So all these dependencies, whenever we are creating, like we have created this for ourselves. So it's a customizable. So whenever we are using these options, the dependency pass on to this authentication handler. Now, we if you don't write this base authentication, there would be a problem because the authentication handler already has a constructor which is a parameterized. If it wasn't parameterized, or it would have been default constructed, if you look onto this particular class and if it has a default constructor, we didn't have to write this base. It would have automatically taken the default constructor and given us the value. But in this case, there is a parameterized constructor, so we need to pass the we are inheriting options, logger, encoder, and then whenever we are creating particular objects, all those dependencies are being passed to the authentication handler so that it gets us, so that we can actually do the authentication. We were up to the protected override. So another method, and in which basically another function, so task. which has the data type authentication result and is doing the async from the handle authentication async. So the first thing is response header. So if the user needs to add a header, that's the important thing. And what kind of header that needs to be added is the basic auth. So there are ample number of option in the header part. And as you can see, we have basic auth selected over here. There could be no authentication, JWT there. It's up to you what kind of application you're designing. Then after that, it checks like whether the user has actually done the selected the authentication part. If not, authentication header is missing. And if they have selected the authentication part of it, but they weren't using the basic format. Now, the basic format is something like this. So whenever we are using the basic format, we need to write the email and there are columns and then the password. So the format should be correct. Then we are encoding our credentials, storing them inside the encoded current credentials, and after that we are actually decoding those. And here now I showed you that the email and password are like combined, stick together, and using the basic columns. So it splits those, divides them, and when it splits, it sticks like there needs to be a column present, and then it splits them into two different parts. And this decoding credential.length checks like whether it has actually split them into two different parts. If not, then the authentication is invalid. Now here I have told that the email would be at the index 0 and the password would be at index 1. What I mean by that and how I'm so sure about it, because whenever I'm checking it on the Postman, the first thing that is asked for is the username, so 0, and same goes with the password 1. And after that, we are actually passing this inside the user. So we are passing the email inside the user, and if the user hasn't entered any sort of email, it's null, authentication is failed, then the hasher part. Now hasher part, like we are actually posting something onto the Postman. Let's do one post request, and then let me explain you what I mean by that is post. Just wait. Let's just copy our URL. Copy the URL. Users. Let's go with the name and the first name. Last name. Password. Let's just remain the same and given the so in my code I have just described two roles. One is the admin and another one is the user. So let's just post, and posting of the user could be done by anyone. We will be looking onto that. Just a second. Okay, maybe let's just say no to that and let's hope it works. There's our controller. Okay, now it should be working. There you go. So what I posted over here. If you look onto our body, the password seems to be admin123, but it generated some gibberish value. It's not gibberish. It's like Okay, where's the code? Okay, it generates a particular hashing password, and that the hashing password has some salt value. What I mean by salt value is like it creates a random value for your password, and then it matches whenever you do the authentication part. So let's move to the next line of our code. Now we generated a particular hash password for our password. So that is every hash password. This hash password hasher is a class, and we are passing the data type user model. So whatever we have in our database, the particular instance for that are stored. The password, all those passwords are stored inside this hasher, and we are actually verifying them over here. Now, how it verifies? It checks the username and what kind of hash password it gave at that particular instance to our user. So that, and what password we are actually using, like when we are verifying ourselves, when we are logging onto the website again. So it checks that if it fails, then the authentication fails. Now, talking about claims, I have a diagram for you. Now, talking about claims, claims are nothing but the facts about the user. Now, take for example, like you are going to the authorities and they are asking for your identity. Now, you can provide them your identity in different form. You have your passport, you can they can identify you using your license or PAN sometimes. Now, what kind of information that particular identity have? In case of the password, we have holder's name, holder's date of birth, signature, passport number. Now, each of these attribute is what a claim is. It's a fact about that user. And we can have multiple facts inside an identity. Now, a user could have ample number of entities, like we have PAN, license, password. But all this belongs to who? That particular user. So that subject is what a principal is. Now let's look on to the code. Now we created claims, created actually an array which has the claim like the name, which is from the first name and the last name, and what kind of role do we have. Now storing that, now what I told you, like identity is nothing but the collection of claims. Now we are storing all those uh, claims, like the array of that, onto the identity. And what kind of authentication we did? We did the basic. So the scheme.name is actually talking about the type of authentication that we did is basic auth. Now the principle. Now the principle says like what was the like it has all different types of identity. Now, in this case, we are just using this particular identity. It has all the information about the user. Now, a principal, like a subject, could have ample number of identities. That's what I talked about. Like they could have passport, they could have a PAN, they could have a license. In our case, they could do the verification using JWT token, which I didn't use. But if, for example, if I would have used, then I would have to create two identities, and those two identity would have been belonging to that particular user. Now the ticket, now in identity, we actually store the all the objects of the claims. Same, the token stores all the objects of that principal. Here, the identity is one particular login type, like, and the principal deals with all the different login types. Here, we are creating that particular instance, and it actually takes like it tells us that user is authenticated, that particular user through different number of identity could happen, and sometimes the ticket could also have the timestamp, so it could be valid for a particular instance of time. It's just a default, so here I haven't suggested anything, so it's valid uh, for the period of time whenever you're visiting the website. And again, what kind of authentication we did is the basic auth. Now that value is then displayed to the user, like they have successfully logged in onto the website. Now let's run, we actually have already run it, and let's do the authentication part. So I have created and posted something anku at the rate example.com, and I have this password. Now let's get the information out of it, and let's go with the map, say no to this, and do the authentication, selecting the authentication type basic auth, and then I'll be talking about the controllers, how the claims are the ones responsible, that what kind of authorization we can do. They are the one responsible in order to do the authorization part. So it was example.com and the password that we posted. And this password that we actually posted would be compared to this, that the PasswordHasher were generated. So let's just check. It should be giving us the value now. As a normal user, I have been given these values. If I wanted to get something else, and in that particular authorization, the normal user doesn't have the authority to get those information out. So in our normal controller class, in order to get the information, a normal user can get it. But if we wanted to post something, a normal user won't be able to post anything. Or in order to put something, a normal user won't be able to put. Let's just go with the, let's just try to put 16. And I don't be using the body, I just would be telling you like I couldn't put it. So my already have inserted the password and the email. Let's just send it, and it should be saying forbidden. Access to the resources forbidden. Try different authentication credential. So we are not allowed to do that. And let's move to the email account, which is actually has the admin. So the first one is admin example. Let's run that. Admin, yeah, unsupported media, because I haven't any actually mentioned anything onto the. Let's just get just a second. Let's just copy it and try to put it for the 16th value. Go to the body, raw. Let's just say ID 16, column 1000. Let's just not mention this. It will be generated itself. Now we're good to go. There you have it. I generated something. Let's just get the value again. 16 should say 1000 now, and when it was created. So that's how you do the authentication. And let me just show you the controller file. So you just have to write this part, authorize policy user only, authorize policy admin for whatever you wanted. And same do this for the controller, robot command controller. That's how you do it. Thanks for watching the video.